The new Hell of a Boss episode is here, and maybe for the first time, the Hell of a Boss fanbase is finally acknowledging all the flaws I've mentioned in the past with this show. I'll be going over a brief summary of what happens in this episode, so if you want to get right to the review, skip to the time displayed on the screen now. The episode begins with Stolas having a meeting with Stella and her brother Androlphus, discussing the financial details of the divorce and how much compensation Stella deserves. Their meeting is interrupted by Stryker, who uses blessed rope to tie Stolas up and kidnaps him. Stolas is able to call Blitz and asks him for help, but Blitz is too busy to assist Stolas because he has an appointment for Loona to get her Hellbees shots. Moxie and Millie jump on the opportunity to help Stolas due to wanting to settle a score with Stryker, and Blitz gives them the van to do so. While Blitz waits in the lobby for his appointment and Moxie and Millie are tracking Stryker down, Stryker tortures Stolas and is about to kill him, but is interrupted by a phone call from Stella. While all this was happening, Stella told Androlphus that she hired Stryker, and Androlphus brought up the point that if Stolas is killed, then all of the inheritance will go to Octavia. Androlphus convinces Stella to call off the hit and have Stolas brought to them, saving Stolas' life. Before Stryker is able to bring Stolas back, Moxie and Millie break into his lair in a fast-paced fight montage that switches between the battle against Stryker and Blitz trying to make Loona take her shot plays out. Moxie and Millie are able to defeat Stryker, but he escapes before they are able to deal the finishing blow, and rush Stolas to the hospital that Loona and Blitz are leaving. Blitz notices Stolas being brought into the hospital and texts Stolas to get better soon message, much to Stolas' elation. Stolas invites Blitz to visit him, but Blitz leaves him on red, and the episode ends with Stolas falling asleep disappointed. There is no denying that this is Stryker's episode. We get a monologue from him that hints that the royals in hell did something so terrible to him that he now hates all royalty and gets genuine enjoyment out of making them suffer. This is some delightfully surprising character development for him that makes him more than just a hitman, and he isn't cruel just for the sake of being cruel. Hell of a Boss has been long overdue for a serious, intimidating antagonist, and I think the writers wanted him to fill this role. The only problem is that Stryker is not that, or should I say, no longer that. I know that I'm not the only one who knows that the Stryker in this episode is quite different from the Stryker back in Harvest Moon Festival. The Stryker from that episode was cool, calm, collected, charming, and unfazed by anything that didn't go his way. This Stryker is a lot more reactionary and narcissistic, which I think overall just made him a lot less compelling, since him being so collected is what made him stand out in a show full of narcissists who overreact. Blitz doesn't really do anything in this episode that is worth shining attention on. His bickering and confrontational attitude in the hospital lobby produces some smirk-worthy moments, but he's just the same old Blitz. In defense of Blitz though, he is sidelined in this episode so that Moxie and Millie get the spotlight, and they certainly do, but the spotlight is so dim that nothing of value is revealed. Neither of them really do or say anything meaningful that makes either of them more memorable once the episode is over. There is that one fight scene at the gas station with Moxie, which was very appreciated since Moxie has been lacking those throughout the series, but unlike almost all of Millie's fight scenes that are front and center, Moxie's is in the background, which I think is supposed to be comedic, but I would have much rather had his fight scene formatted more like Millie's since it's such a rare occasion for him to even have one. And as for Millie, well, she's Millie. The only standout moment she gets is being the one to suggest that Moxie and her can hunt down Stryker. But I almost prefer it this way since a lot of the fighting was able to be focused on Moxie since Millie was on the sidelines, and the rivalry between Moxie and Stryker is more personal than Millie's rivalry with him, so it is tonally consistent. Stella is as cruel as she always has been in this episode. As per usual, we get no deeper exploration into her character that reveals anything new or surprising, but I do like that it's implied that she is kind of the family idiot. It's not much, but it's at least something that adds to her character. Stella's brother Androlphus is just a stereotype. Condescending, scheming, effeminate, posh, kind of incestuous. Yep, these hit all the marks for an overdone royal villain. Nothing really unique or interesting here. Lastly, Stolas is the same old Stolas, but for some reason, his obsession with Blitz is really highlighted in this episode. From the moment he's in danger to the middle of him being tortured to what would have been his dying words, he can't help himself from thinking about Blitz. It's gone to the point where this character is almost as defined by his relationship with Blitz as Millie is to Moxie, but of course not as bad since his love for Octavia and hatred for Stella keep him from getting to that point. Blitz, Moxie, Millie, and Stolas all feel like they are acting out roles they've been assigned, with none of them doing or saying anything that develops their characters before the last minute of the episode. Blitz is aggressive and rude just like he's always been, Moxie tries his best and barely manages to achieve the goal he set out to do just like he always does, Millie is barely a character who is really good at fighting like she's always been, and Stolas makes every situation he's in sexual in relation to Blitz like he always does. Stella gets about as minimal development as a character can get, Stryker gets development and a slight personality change that was probably for the worse, and Androlphus is barely a character worth talking about. This is definitely the most comedic episode in Season 2, but unfortunately the comedy in this episode is the epitome of the worst Hell of a Boss comedy it has to offer. I do think that Blitz's interaction with the receptionist was funny, but it wasn't because of Blitz. It was because of how terribly underqualified the receptionist was, which may not be exactly original, but I think the reason it works so well is because in a world of Hell of a Boss, where 80% of the jokes are sexual or just characters swearing for the sake of swearing, she does neither, and it was such a needed breath of fresh air. As for Blitz, however, the entire punchline of his interaction with her is, you guessed it, swearing. So much swearing. There's also a point in this scene where he's about to call the receptionist the R word and refrains from doing so because it's no longer socially accepted, which was supposed to be funny, but as someone who's watched this series from the beginning to now would know, Blitz is the last person who would ever censor himself for political correctness. That's his entire shtick, saying things out loud in public areas that are overly crude or vulgar. I don't get why they would even include this line to begin with, since it's not only inconsistent with his personality, but the punchline just of him acknowledging that it's no longer acceptable to say just feels forced. Speaking of comedy that feels forced, there's this running gag of characters saying the C word, but it getting bleeped out, which severely feels out of place in a show where the comedy relies on shock value over clever jokes. If you're going to try to do edgy humor, you have to go all in with it, or the edginess of the show feels artificial. Kind of like a child who starts to rebel by dressing up in emo clothes and bragging to their friends about it, and then their friends dare them to curse in front of their parents and they are too scared to do so. The other half of the comedy in this episode is sexual jokes, which of course is coming from Stolas, and have far past the point of being overdone, but it's even worse in this episode because he's in a dire situation. Stolas has been kidnapped and is actively being tortured. The entire episode revolves around this event and is supposed to be taken seriously. Yet while Stolas is being tortured, for some reason the writers thought it was a good idea to make sex jokes during the torture sequence? Why should the audience take the situation that Stolas is in seriously if the character himself won't take the situation seriously? All the tension and intensity is completely ruined by Stolas making these completely unnecessary jokes that just kill the flow of the scene and treat the premise of the episode as a joke. On top of that, there was this phallic joke in relation to Stryker's statue, which is yet another sexual joke crammed in to ruin the tension, but it also is uncharacteristic of Stryker's character. He's always known he is better than everyone else, but I figured him more to be like Crimson and keep mementos from his victims to show off his achievements, not have an immature statue of himself that looks like it was designed by Chaz. Before we move on, I also want to give attention to the scene where Moxie is getting choked out by Stryker and making the situation sexual. I'm not going to say that this moment wasn't in character for Moxie, since realistically it was probably one of the only things he could have done to get out of the situation he was in, but if it was supposed to be funny, it was just way too obvious that this was the direction the scene was going towards. Not only because throughout the entire episode, every time someone was actively being hurt by Stryker, there was always a sexual punchline that followed, but for some reason it feels like this joke was done before. I wonder why. In short, the humor in this episode is egregious, with Blitz's swearing no longer being clever and now more akin to him using them like they are punctuation marks, and Stolas' sex jokes actively detracting from the episode's core conflict, which, by the way, has now happened twice in a row, with the sex toy joke from the previous episode effectively doing the same thing. Boy, is subverting expectations by interrupting a serious moment with sex jokes effective when you repeat it multiple times, am I right? Anyways, there are moments throughout this episode that showed real promise to have some interesting moments, but were never capitalized on. I already discussed the rare moment for Moxie and Millie having a one-on-one discussion being wasted, but there was also an opportunity to have the very rare interaction between them and Stolas after they rescue him. Unfortunately, there is no scene where they interact, which feels like a missed opportunity, but in the show's defense, Stolas was probably passed out by blood loss by the time they rescued him, so I won't dwell on it too much. Something I will dwell on though is the unnecessary B-plot with Blitz and Loona. Just like Moxie and Millie, it's rare to see Blitz and Millie have one-on-one interactions, and their relationship has kind of been stagnant since episode 3. One could argue that their relationship was explored back in Seeing Stars, but that only really had Loona voice her inner thoughts about Blitz, and all the in-person interactions we had with them was just her abusing him. For the first time, however, we actually do get to see Loona genuinely scared and vulnerable, and the only one there for her is Blitz. This could have been the perfect opportunity for a bonding moment between Loona and Blitz where Loona could have confided in Blitz and he could have comforted her. Instead, however, nothing of any value comes out of this side plot, which ultimately felt like a waste of time. The entire sequence where he's actually in the doctor's office should have been cut so we could have had more of a focus on the main plot or Moxie and Millie. I won't hold the missed potential of this side plot against the writers though, since I'm pretty confident that this was originally going to be the bonding scene between Loona and Blitz that I wanted it to be. We actually do get a quick scene where Loona smiles at Blitz after he reassures her, which I think might be one of the only, if not the first time she shows any gratitude towards Blitz directly. And if you're wondering why this plot didn't have that bonding moment and Loona did not so much as say a word towards Blitz throughout the entire episode, Luna's voice actress Erica Lindbeck's fiance died recently, and she has been taking a break, which is also why Loona was voiceless in the last episode, which I noticed is kind of odd, but I didn't find it worth mentioning in my review for that episode. It's a shame that what could have been one of the best moments of this season didn't come to fruition, but like I said, I'm not going to hold it against the writers since the situation was out of their hands, and of course I'm not going to blame the voice actress' decision to take a break. The last moment I would like to mention before we get to the best scene of the episode is the fight between Stryker, Moxie, and Millie. I don't think this fight scene is better than Truth Seekers, but has some pretty great fight choreography and is fast paced enough to keep my attention. I was actually fairly impressed with this scene, but just like Stolas ruining the tension in the scenes he was in, this fight's flow and tension is ruined by cutting between the fight scene and Blitz and Loona in the doctor's office. This fight was supposed to be the climax of the episode, and for some reason the writers wanted it to be interrupted by the meaningless B-plot that was happening at the same time. It wasn't funny, it didn't help the pacing of the fight, and there was no reason I can think of that would justify making a creative choice like this, except for giving the animation team a break, but even then I would have just preferred a short uninterrupted fight scene than what we ended up getting. Alright, with all that out of the way, we have finally made it to the scene that has everyone talking, and what I consider to be one of the most emotional scenes in the entirety of the show. At the end of the episode, after Stolas is taken to the hospital, Blitz sends a get well text to Stolas, and we actually get to see their text history since the event of Ozzy's. And since then, Stolas has desperately tried to get things back to the way they were, and has been nothing but respectful to Blitz since then. His efforts were all for nothing, however, since no matter how hard he tried, Blitz has stayed distant and completely disregarded any attempts at reconciliation. Reading these texts is hard to watch, and I know that Blitz is purposely staying distant because he has lost everyone he cares about and doesn't want that to happen again, but even then I can't help but get aggravated by how little effort Blitz puts into his relationship with Stolas, while Stolas has gotten to the point of actively demeaning himself for Blitz. And there's even a moment in the beginning of the episode where these interactions are hinted at when Stolas calls Blitz and he says it's not a good time, and Stolas apologizes for it being a bad time yet again. As in, Stolas has tried to call Blitz before and Blitz always says it's a bad time so that he can avoid having a conversation with Stolas. Stolas has a lot of problems both in the relationship and in the writing sense, and I'm more than sick of their arc at this point. Still, I do have to admit this side story of Blitz avoiding Stolas is done tastefully and subtly, both avoiding taking up a lot of the viewer's time and attention away from the rest of the episode, and being such a painfully tragic and realistic behind-the-scenes side plot for fans of the ship to analyze if they want to. This 1-minute scene ended the episode off on a highlight and completely overshadowed the rest of the episode, which I would usually see as a negative, but this episode definitely needed something to leave an impression on the viewer, and this scene did just that. Western Energy is a tone-deaf, poorly paced, near total waste of the viewer's time that added almost nothing of value and highlighted some of the show's worst writing aspects. This episode wanted to be tense, since a main character is in danger, but the pacing and poorly placed humor killed any momentum that this episode had going for it, ultimately leaving it as an unengaging story that failed to captivate the tone it was going for, with its only redeeming quality being a somber text conversation that told a more interesting and emotional story in under 20 seconds than the 17 minutes that predated it.
Fuck me in my little red hole!